So we've spent the last couple of weeks looking at research design. We've looked at program evaluation designs, but one final piece to that in terms of looking at research and its design is research integrity. So what we expect is we expect researchers to maintain the highest moral standards and ethical standards, and part of that is that they follow the procedures that they have designed for their research study. They collect the data and they analyze the data, and then they follow the procedures in terms of the analysis, and they let the data kind of like speak for itself. So, here's my results, and what we're going to see in this week is that researchers are under a lot of pressure. They're under pressure to produce results for the organizations that they work for, whether it be a pharmaceutical company, program evaluation research, marketing research. They have clients, and the clients oftentimes are, and you're going to see it in your major research project next semester. Clients are very passionate, very committed, and they want to see results that kind of like fit with their thinking. So, but sometimes the results don't show what they expect. And sometimes researchers then, some researchers that lack integrity will either change the data, delete cases that don't fit with the results that they expect, or sometimes they won't even actually run the studies. They'll just make data up. They're just too busy to actually run it, and they'll just say, okay, I've got a $500,000 grant. I'm supposed to be running these studies, but I've been so busy teaching and doing other work, and I just don't have time, and they just make up the data. And sometimes they do things that are really ethically unsound to get the data that they need. And an example of this is the first one here with Elijah McClain. Elijah was given ketamine as a sedative, and he was given way too much given his size. He wasn't a very big person, and it may have contributed to his death. How does that fit? You can watch the video use of ketamine in policing, but in terms of ethics violations and lack of integrity, so what happened was in Minnesota, they were looking at the use of ketamine, and it was in a emergency ward at a hospital, and they were using it as a sedative. And what would happen is that in emergency care research, oftentimes you can't get the consent of the participant for a research study. They come in unconscious, and the person, they don't have next of kin with them, so they have no one to take, as a person to make a decision for them, as a close contact, family member, loved one. And what'll happen is they'll have research studies that on emergency medicine, and they can only do it in that setting. So oftentimes they'll forego informed consent to complete the study. But the problem is in this case, they were using ketamine in a study, but the people were in a place psychologically to be able to. They weren't unconscious. They weren't delusional. They were in a place to make a decision, right, in terms of their consent. So what happened was they just said, okay, well, let's use this study. Let's use ketamine in this study, but we'll apply the notion. We'll apply the guidelines for emergency medicine, where the person is unconscious and can't make a decision for themselves. But we'll just kind of like let it slide a bit and say, okay, it is an emergency room. We won't ask for their consent, even though they can give consent because they're in a state of mind to be able to do so. And it's completely unethical, and it really comes to the research integrity. They were kind of like playing with the policies and procedures in terms of this type of research, and extended it beyond what it was meant to be used for. It was unethical, but it really was the researchers acted without integrity. They were using the rules that were there for emergency room medicine, for research when people can't give consent because they come in unconscious or incapable of giving consent. There's no family members. They were using it in cases where the people were coming in and they were able to give consent because they weren't in that state. So, through a lack of integrity, they applied the policy incorrectly. And the Food and Drug Administration in the States really stepped on them in terms of stopping this. Okay, research integrity. This is from Georgian College. A commitment to intellectual honesty and personal responsibility for one's actions. Researchers must follow research practices that characterize the responsible and ethical conduct of research. So you can have all the, and we'll talk about ethics in other parts of this course and other courses. You can have all the ethical procedures in place, but it's up to the researchers to act with integrity. So once again, it's like you can have policies and procedures. You can have the researcher agree to follow those policies and procedures, but then it's up to the researcher to actually, follow those policies and procedures for ethical behavior in terms of ethical practices. But what happens is sometimes researchers don't do that. They may agree and sign, oh yes, my research is ethically sound, but through a lack of integrity, they don't follow the procedures. They cheat, they fake, and they make up stuff. And we'll go through a number of examples of this. And we'll also, at the end, go through one where it's actually, I like to end it on a more positive note. This is a research integrity issue, and it's going to be about a person who was charged and sentenced and convicted and sentenced to life in prison for murder. It's the Luca Magnotta case, and this is where researchers actually stood their ground and acted with integrity and refused to release information that was given to them confidentially by Luca Magnotta. And they went to court over it and fought it in court, even though they didn't have the financial resources to actually have that fight, because the university they were associated with didn't provide them the funding for their legal defense. Now for the bad characters, the bad apples. This is Dr. Ranjit Chandra. You can watch the video linked here. It's the national documentary on CBC News in Canada on the life and career of Dr. Chandra. As you can see, Dr. Chandra was given the Order of Canada, and in his little bio, a university research professor at Memorial University of Newfoundland. He is recognized as a leader in medical research related to the areas of pediatrics and immunology. He has had great success in establishing a link between the Canadian and Third World pediatric communities and has been chosen to head the World Health Organization Collaborating Center for Research and Training in Nutritional Immunology. So he's an immunologist that focuses on nutrition, and he published a number of studies. One study was found funding from the Nestle Corporation that infant formula, kids who get infant formula were less likely to develop allergies. He's done work on vitamins, and he also did a study on looking at Alzheimer's, and he developed he had a vitamin-based concoction that, when given to patients with Alzheimer's, was thought to reverse the symptoms of Alzheimer's. So, which was quite revolutionary and really actually quite shocking. And that was published in Immunology Research. Dr. Chandra was a leading researcher at Memorial University of Newfoundland. He was thought to be a candidate in the future for a Nobel Prize for the research that he has completed, and basically his research career path, in terms of he was just getting more and more famous and doing more and more amazing things. With the Alzheimer's study, and it was published in a nutrition journal, I believe, but it caught the attention of cognitive psychologists who worked in human memory and had done work on Alzheimer's and memory loss. And Dr. Chandra had used a standardized test for the assessment of the severity of the Alzheimer's symptoms shown by the participants in his study. And when the cognitive psychologists looked at the results in terms of the averages and the scores, like the averages for the Alzheimer's standardized test, the scores were incredibly low. And these people were basically going from moderately comatose to fully comatose in terms of the difference between the treatment and control group. And there were very subtle differences. There was really not much of an improvement at all. And the way Dr. Chandra talked about them in terms of the outcomes, in terms of his narrative, his description of the the benefits of this vitamin regime, it looked like they were actually really they were actually relatively high functioning Alzheimer's people, but the scores from the standardized test suggested otherwise. So the researchers, the two cognitive psychologists, contacted Dr. Chandra. Can we look at your data? Because in terms of research integrity, you're supposed to keep your data for a number of years to allow other research opportunity to review the data and to analyze it if they want. So it's kind of like a peer-to-peer watchdog in some sense. So Dr. Chandra blew them off and said, "Oh, yeah, I'll get the data to you." So they would, email him or call him. Can you get that data? "Oh, yeah, I'm really busy right now, but I'll get it to you. I'll get one of my research associates or assistants to send it to you." And he kind of like, put stonewalled them in terms of their getting access to the data. And finally, it came out that there was no data. He actually never ran the study. He actually made up the results. It was all fake data. And then they started asking, what about his work with the Nestle's Corporation on infant formulas and the advantages of infant formula use for newborns? And they said, well, how was he made up the data in this study? So is this just one example of a trend in this person's behavior? And what they did was they started asking about the infant formula studies, and he had a registered nurse who was his research assistant. And she had raised concerns years previous to this Alzheimer's study, and saying that Dr. Chen is publishing these studies. I'm his research associate, his assistant, and I'm the one who's supposed to go find these newborns in the hospitals in Newfoundland. And I have to tell you, it's really hard to get people to volunteer to participate in this study and commit to using infant formula. And he's running around publishing studies where he's got like 40, 50 infants in his study. And so I was responsible for collecting and refining the participants and collecting data, and these studies were never done because we never got enough participants. And the university at the time said, told her to go away. You're just a nurse, and what business have you got making these outlandish accusations or insinuations against Dr. Chandra? He's a leading researcher at our university, and they would, when you're kind of like looking at universities to go to, he's the type of guy, that person that they would be promoting, saying, come to the Memorial University, home of a potential Nobel laureate, a Nobel candidate for in the medicine, Dr. Chandra, a world-renowned researcher working with the World Health Organization. And you'd see big billboards of his face around Memorial University. So it's part of their marketing campaign. And when part of a marketing campaign, the university is under pressure to kind of keep everything kind of kosher in some sense, and he's kind of like an outstanding researcher. So they blew her off and dismissed her suggestions that there was something wrong until the Alzheimer's study came out, and then kind of like as I say, the poop hit the wall. And there was a big investigation, and for the Nestle Corporation work that he did, he made up all the data. It was all fake. He didn't collect the data. He just made it all up and then put it into research reports and published them, and became quite famous doing it. And he received a lot of grant money to do this. So if he could receive millions of dollars from the Nestle Corporation to run these studies, well, it costs money to run studies. He never ran them, so there was not much cost. So he collected lots of money for research grants and pocketed the money and used it for his own personal use or gain. And he was basically, I believe the Order of Canada was stripped away. That was taken away from him. He basically, the university wanted to get rid of him. He was never criminally charged for fraud or any kind of misconduct, and the university never fired him. They retired him off. So they retired him. He's still a practicing doctor, I think, in Europe someplace, and he was never forced to give the money back for the research grants for the research studies that he never actually did because he made the data up. Well, what was the outcome? His wife divorced him, and if anyone, she hired a forensic accountant to dig up all the money that he basically stole in terms of grant money, and it was all tucked away in foreign country bank accounts throughout Europe. So the forensic accountant found the money, and she got half of it. That was really the only outcome of any consequence to Dr. Chandra. Another example, Dr. Scott Rubin. Dr. Scott Rubin, as you will see in the article, he's referred to as the Bernie Madoff, of research research corruption. And these are a list on the right of the series of studies. Well, he was looking at the Cox class of painkillers, and he was investigating. It was a painkiller, and he was working in a veterans hospital, and he was looking at post-operative pain management in people coming back from one of the many areas of conflict that the American military is involved in. And many of them were coming back with shoulder injuries, and they'd get shoulder surgery. Well, Dr. Scott Rubin would be responsible for the post-operative pain management, and he was running studies for the Pfizer drug company on the Cox class of painkillers. And as you'll see in the links associated with this on Blackboard for this week, he made up all his data. So he never actually ran studies to test the efficacy of the Cox class of painkillers he was testing for the Pfizer drug company. It was all made up. And he made a lot of money from his grant money. But the problem here is, on the medical side of this, there were serious side effects with the Cox class of painkillers. And one of the serious side effects was a higher risk of heart attack. So a number of people died from the results of this drug being, they sold billions of pills, but being approved by the FDA and then sold as a painkiller. And it was eventually this class of painkillers was taken off the market. But his fraudulent behavior, his unethical and lack of integrity, led to essentially criminal-like behavior. Now, I think the outcomes were more serious for him because this is the U.S. and the U.S. is very has a very high, a great focus on litigation. So I think he was sued. Okay, and another example, Main Street Research. Well, Main Street Research will be something that you're going to probably find out about through the Marketing Research and Intelligence Association. The Main Street Research, the heads of that organization are now the owners of and proprietors of the Marketing Research and Intelligence Association, which is the association that we at RAP used to have a close association with. What's their background and how were they tied to research integrity? As we'll see. Main Street responds to allegations that coordinated polls to influence Calgary mayoral race. Wow. They predicted that Bill Smith was going to be elected mayor of Calgary over the incumbent Naheed Nenshi. So Bill Smith was the more conservative candidate, and Naheed Nenshi was the more left-wing, more centralist candidate. They called for an 80. The market's Main Street Research called for an 48-31% win for Smith over Nenshi. So that's a whopping 17 percentage point gap in early October. That lowered to 13 points 3 days before the election in terms of their polling. But the end result was Nenshi was re-elected with an 8-point lead. Okay. Maggi was the head of analytics for the Main Street marketing research firm for Main Street. I was like, well, what happened here? There were allegations that Main Street coordinated with its media partner, Post Media, to influence the campaign. It was suggested that we coordinated polling with the Bill Smith campaign, conducted push polling, and conducted push polling, and other worked for the Calgary Flames organization. So what they did is they were commissioned by Smith to send out polls, and sometimes the polling would basically be a marketing ad for the candidate. So they'd ask questions, they'd give information that would promote the candidate, and then ask their question. And they used an unethical sampling methodology to kind of like sway the results towards the candidate that they were basically being paid by to run the poll. Then they went out and got into an online Twitter fight with Dwayne Bratt, who was a university political science professor. So they had a tit for tat going back and forth. Okay, and basically the research is incredibly unethical, and really it's done with very little integrity. And in 2017, The Marketing and Research Association, MRIA, sanctioned Main Street and Maggi for their their lack of integrity in terms of their polling practices. So the association alleged Mainstream had erred by violating its articles of basic principles, honesty, professional responsibility, and published the findings. Okay, so that's the MRIA. And who are some of the people at Main Street? Um, let's see. That president is Maggi. Where did I see? There's a name here I'm looking for. Well, let's look at, let's search. Let's go on Main Street Research. Who we are. Okay, Vice President is Dr. Joseph Angolano, got a PhD from the London School of Economics. So he's Vice President. Okay, let's go back to our. Okay, let's see the MRIA, which sanctions Main Street Research. Um, there on the board of directors, the vice president on the board of directors for um, MRIA is now Joseph Angolano, who is vice president of Mainstream Research. And Mainstream Research basically bought the assets from the MRIA when it went bankrupt, which is a different story. So the organization that was MRIA before it was owned by these people was sanctioned for its lack of integrity when it came to polling and marketing research. And now the MRIA has on its board of directors one of those people that it sanctioned before it went bankrupt, which is a separate story. But so in marketing research and in applied research, research integrity has its gray areas. And the final piece for today, when I want you to spend time, is reading through the all the documents and videos I've put up on Blackboard for the Luca Magnotta case, which you can, if you want, if you have Netflix, you can watch, excuse my language, Don't Fuck with Cats, Hunting an Internet Killer, which is a Netflix documentary on Luca Magnotta. But you'll also see research that was done. Luca Magnotta ended up murdering an individual and was convicted of that murder, but in the trial case, it was found that he had participated in a research study on street workers. He was a male prostitute in Montreal about a number of years before the murder. And it came to the attention of the Montreal police that he had participated in this research.